In the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, Pastor William Carter was a man respected by all. He led the New Light Baptist Church, a place of worship that stood as a pillar in the community. Every Sunday, hundreds gathered to hear his sermons, drawn in by his deep voice and the conviction in his words. His congregation believed in him. He preached about faith, redemption, and family values. To them, he was a man of God, a man above sin, a man who would never stray from the path of righteousness. His life seemed perfect. He was married to Evelyn Carter, a kind and quiet woman who played her role as the devoted pastor's wife. Together, they had a daughter, Emily, who had just turned 17. She was bright, beautiful, and active in the church. She sang in the choir, helped with Sunday school, and planned to study theology in college. To outsiders, they were a flawless Christian family. But behind closed doors, Pastor Carter was living a double life. For years, he had maintained an open marriage with Evelyn. Their agreement was unspoken, but understood. They remained husband and wife in public, but in private, they sought comfort elsewhere. Evelyn had accepted this arrangement, believing that what happened behind closed doors did not matter as long as their family appeared intact. Pastor Carter's secret was darker than most. His lover was not just any member of the congregation. It was his best friend, Deacon Robert Hughes. The two men had known each other since seminary. Robert was a successful businessman and a pillar in the community. He was married with children, just like William. They shared the same values, the same ambition, and the same faith. And in secret, they shared each other. Their affair had begun years ago during a church retreat in the mountains. What started as a drunken mistake turned into something neither could resist. It was dangerous, forbidden, and against everything they stood for. Yet, they could not stop. Over time, it became more than just physical. They depended on each other in ways that went beyond friendship. Emily Carter had always been an observant girl. She saw things that others did not. She noticed how her father would glance at Deacon Hughes when he thought no one was looking. She noticed how the two men spent long hours together and how their conversations would stop when she entered the room. One night, she saw something she was never meant to see. She had gone to church to retrieve a forgotten notebook. She heard whispers in the pastor's office, the shuffle of feet, the creak of furniture. When she peeked through the crack in the door, what she saw changed her forever. She could not believe it. Her father, the man who stood before the congregation every Sunday, the man who preached about morality and sin, was living a lie. She left the church in silence, her hands shaking. For days, Emily kept the secret to herself. But the weight of what she had seen became unbearable. She confided in her mother, hoping for guidance. Evelyn listened, her face unreadable, and then she told Emily the truth. Their marriage had never been real. Emily felt sick. Everything she believed about her family was a lie. The anger inside her grew. She could not stay silent. She had to confront her father. When she did, everything changed. Pastor Carter begged her to stay quiet. He told her it was a private matter, something that did not concern her. But Emily refused. She threatened to expose him, to reveal his hypocrisy to the entire church. She could not allow him to stand at the pulpit and deceive everyone who trusted him. Her father's face darkened. His voice was calm, but his eyes were filled with something she had never seen before: fear, desperation, and something much worse. The next morning, Emily Carter was missing. Her mother called the police after she failed to return home. A search began. Friends and family posted flyers, hoping for any sign of her. The congregation prayed. The community came together. Then, a week later, her body was found. She was discovered in a wooded area just outside the city. Her hands were bound. Her face was bruised. The autopsy revealed that she had been strangled. The town of Atlanta was in shock. Who would do such a thing to a sweet, innocent girl? Detective Marcus Reynolds was assigned to the case. A seasoned investigator with over 20 years of experience, Reynolds had seen his share of homicides. But something about this case felt different. It was not just another murder. It was something deeper, something darker. Pastor Carter stood before his congregation the following Sunday, tears in his eyes. He spoke of loss, of faith, of trusting in God's plan. He said Emily had been taken too soon, that she was in heaven now. The church wept with him. But Detective Reynolds was watching. He had seen men like Carter before, men who knew how to manipulate a crowd, how to wear the mask of grief while hiding something sinister. He did not know what yet, but he knew this. Pastor William Carter was not as innocent as he seemed, and he was going to prove it. Detective Marcus Reynolds arrived at the scene where Emily Carter's body had been found. The wooded area, about 10 miles outside the city, was eerily quiet. Police tape surrounded the crime scene, and forensic specialists moved carefully through the area, collecting evidence. Emily's body had been discovered by a group of hikers who had called 911 immediately. Reynolds observed the scene with a practiced eye. He noted the positioning of the body, the state of her clothing, and the lack of immediate signs of struggle. Emily had been killed elsewhere and dumped here. Someone had taken care to ensure she would not be found immediately. The autopsy report confirmed his suspicions. Emily had died from strangulation. Bruises on her wrists indicated she had been restrained. There were no signs of sexual assault, but there was something else. Under her fingernails, forensic specialists had found traces of skin. She had fought back. Reynolds started with the family. He met with Evelyn Carter at their home, a modest but well-kept house near the church. She was grieving but composed, answering his questions with a steady voice. She last saw Emily the night before she disappeared. She assumed her daughter had gone to bed. By morning, she was gone. Pastor Carter's reaction was different. He played the grieving father well, but Reynolds could see the cracks. He was too controlled, too rehearsed. He spoke of Emily in the past tense, as if he had already accepted her death before she had been found. Something was off. The more Reynolds investigated, the more inconsistencies he found. Emily's phone records showed a call to her father late at night. A call that lasted only a few seconds. Security footage from the church showed Pastor Carter leaving in his car that same night. Pastor William Carter was hiding something, and Reynolds was getting closer to the truth. Detective Reynolds began retracing Emily's final days, searching for any sign of what had led to her murder. The first breakthrough came from her school records. Her attendance had been impeccable until the week before she vanished. She had skipped classes. Something completely out of character. Her closest friend, Rachel Mills, confirmed that Emily had been upset about something but refused to talk about it. Reynolds pressed on, determined to expose the truth. Reynolds obtained Emily's phone records and found multiple late-night calls to an unknown number. After tracing it, he discovered it belonged to Deacon Robert Hughes. Why would Emily be calling her father's best friend? He decided to visit Hughes. The deacon welcomed him into his large suburban home, his demeanor polite but visibly tense. Hughes claimed he barely spoke to Emily, dismissing the calls as accidental or trivial. But Reynolds wasn't convinced. As he pressed further, Hughes's hands trembled, his voice faltering. Then Reynolds received another lead. Emily's diary, hidden beneath her mattress, contained disturbing entries. The last few pages spoke of secrets too dark to be kept any longer. "If I speak, I know he'll never forgive me. But I can't live like this," one entry read. Surveillance footage from the church showed Carter leaving late at night. The same night, Emily vanished. His car was seen heading in the direction where Emily's body was later found. When confronted, Carter feigned outrage. "Are you accusing me of harming my own daughter?" he bellowed. "That is ridiculous." But Reynolds wasn't backing down. He ordered a forensic analysis of Carter's vehicle. Blood traces were found in the trunk, matching Emily's DNA. The pastor's perfect world was starting to collapse. Evelyn Carter, too, seemed to know more than she let on. When Reynolds questioned her again, she avoided his gaze. Then, in a hushed voice, she muttered, "I warned him. I told him she would find out." Detective Reynolds intensified his investigation, knowing that the cracks in Pastor Carter's carefully constructed life were widening. The mounting evidence left no doubt that Emily's death was not a random act of violence, but a calculated crime. However, Reynolds needed irrefutable proof before making an arrest. The pastor had been a respected figure in the Atlanta community for decades, and bringing him down required airtight evidence. Reynolds turned his attention to Deacon Robert Hughes. Something about his nervous demeanor during their last conversation unsettled him. He requested a full phone records analysis, uncovering a pattern of frequent calls between Hughes and Carter, particularly in the days leading up to Emily's disappearance. Additionally, GPS tracking from Carter's vehicle placed him in the secluded woods where Emily's body was found at a suspiciously late hour. A deeper dive into Emily's diary revealed even more damning details. Several entries pointed to a growing awareness of a disturbing secret within her family. She had written about overhearing hushed conversations between her father and Hughes, as well as her increasing discomfort around them. One entry stood out. "I can't keep quiet anymore. I know what they've been hiding. I thought I was imagining things, but now I see it clearly. They will never admit the truth, but I have proof. I just need to decide what to do next." Reynolds needed to uncover what exactly Emily had discovered. He enlisted the help of forensic technicians to analyze Emily's laptop and phone. A series of deleted messages between her and an unknown contact were retrieved. The messages showed that Emily had arranged to meet someone the night she disappeared. The recipient's identity remained unclear, but based on the timeline, Reynolds suspected it was either Carter or Hughes. To confirm his suspicions, Reynolds sought out Hughes once more. This time, he arrived unannounced at the deacon's residence. Hughes looked visibly exhausted, his eyes sunken, his movements jittery. When Reynolds pressed about his last conversation with Carter, Hughes stammered, claiming he barely spoke to the pastor anymore. But Reynolds had proof otherwise. He placed a folder of phone records and surveillance stills on the table. Hughes paled. "You don't have to go down with him," Reynolds said. "Tell me the truth." Hughes hesitated, his fingers tapping against the wooden table. Finally, he exhaled sharply and muttered, "You have no idea what you've stepped into." Meanwhile, Reynolds's forensic team continued to work on Carter's car. Apart from Emily's blood in the trunk, fibers from the seats matched the sweater she had been wearing the night she disappeared. Furthermore, tiny traces of mud from the forest were found embedded in the vehicle's carpet. The evidence was overwhelming, yet Carter remained defiant. When Reynolds confronted Carter with the findings, the pastor remained calm, almost eerily so. "Detective, you're grasping at shadows," he said with an air of confidence. "Yes, I was in the area. Yes, I was driving late that night. But circumstantial evidence doesn't make me a murderer." Reynolds wasn't deterred. He suspected there was more, something Carter was desperately trying to keep buried. He requested a full forensic sweep of Carter's home, focusing on his private study. It was there that investigators uncovered a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf. Inside was a collection of letters and photographs, evidence of a secret life the pastor had worked tirelessly to conceal. Among the findings were intimate letters exchanged between Carter and Hughes, revealing a relationship far deeper than friendship. In one letter, Carter expressed his fear that Emily had discovered their secret. The final letter, dated just a day before Emily vanished, read, "She knows, Robert. She has proof. If she exposes us, everything we built is gone. We have to act before it's too late." Reynolds had seen enough. Carter wasn't just a grieving father. He was a man who had killed to protect a secret. The time for questions was over. The time for justice had begun. Detective Reynolds now had the missing pieces of the puzzle. The hidden letters and the forensic evidence painted a grim picture. Pastor Carter had not only orchestrated his daughter's murder, but had done so to silence her before she could expose his double life. The case was airtight, but Reynolds knew Carter wouldn't go down without a fight. With a warrant secured, Reynolds and his team moved in to arrest Carter. They arrived at the pastor's home early in the morning, their presence unsettling the quiet suburban street. Carter, dressed in his usual clerical attire, opened the door with an air of feigned surprise. "Detective, what is the meaning of this?" he asked, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. "You're under arrest for the murder of Emily Carter," Reynolds responded, his voice steady. Carter's eyes flickered to his wife, Evelyn, who stood frozen in the hallway. The weight of the moment settled over her, and in that instant, she knew. Her husband was guilty. At the station, Carter maintained his innocence, his arrogance intact. "You have nothing concrete," he said, leaning back in his chair. But Reynolds knew otherwise. He methodically laid out the evidence, the blood in the car, the diary entries, the letters, and the deleted messages. Each revelation chipped away at Carter's bravado until the mask finally cracked. Then, a surprise witness emerged. Rachel Mills, Emily's best friend, stepped forward with new information. On the night of Emily's disappearance, she received a panicked call from her friend. Emily had discovered something damning and was terrified. She had planned to confront her father one final time. Rachel had urged her to leave town, but Emily refused. With Rachel's statement, the prosecution had everything they needed. The trial moved swiftly, the media frenzy intensifying each day. The once revered pastor was now a national disgrace. His congregation, once loyal, turned against him as the truth unraveled. Evelyn Carter, realizing the depths of her husband's deception, testified against him. Her testimony was the final blow. She recounted how she had warned him to stop, how she had begged him to let Emily go. "I knew something was wrong, but I was too afraid to act," she admitted, her voice breaking. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before delivering the verdict. Guilty on all counts. As Carter was led away in handcuffs, he cast one last look at his wife, but she had already turned away. The walls had finally closed in, and there was no escape. Justice had prevailed, but the scars left behind would never fully heal. Reynolds watched from a distance, his job done. The truth had won, but at a great cost. As he stepped out into the sunlight, he took a deep breath, knowing that there would always be another case, another lie to unravel. But for now, Emily Carter had justice, and that was enough. With Pastor Carter convicted, the dust began to settle, but the scars of the case remained. The community of Atlanta was left in shock, grappling with the realization that a man they had trusted for years had been living a double life. The church, once a beacon of hope, now stood as a reminder of betrayal and deception. Attendance dwindled, and the congregation struggled to reconcile their faith with the actions of their former leader. Detective Reynolds, though satisfied with the outcome, couldn't shake the weight of the case. He had uncovered the truth. But at what cost? Emily Carter's life had been taken too soon, and no conviction could bring her back. He spent hours revisiting the case files, replaying the events leading up to her murder. It was a ritual he had developed over years of solving homicides, a way to remind himself of the lives he fought for, but also the ones he couldn't save. Evelyn Carter, now free from her husband's shadow, began the long process of rebuilding her life. The trial had exposed her complicity in keeping secrets, and while she had not been directly involved in Emily's murder, she bore the weight of her silence. The public's sympathy was divided. Some saw her as another victim, while others viewed her as an enabler. She moved out of the family home, unable to bear the memories that haunted its walls. Rachel Mills, Emily's best friend, continued to struggle with the loss. She often visited Emily's grave, leaving fresh flowers and whispering apologies for not doing more to save her. Survivor's guilt weighed heavily on her, but she found solace in speaking out against abuse and secrecy. She became an advocate for victims, using Emily's story as a warning of what could happen when people turned a blind eye to the truth. Meanwhile, Deacon Robert Hughes faced scrutiny of his own. Though not charged with a crime, his connection to Carter and the unanswered questions surrounding his relationship with Emily led to whispers and suspicion. He resigned from the church and disappeared from the public eye, his reputation forever tarnished. As time passed, the case became another chapter in Atlanta's history, but for those closest to it, the wounds remained fresh. Detective Reynolds knew that justice had been served, but he also understood that justice did not always bring closure. Some ghosts never left, and some questions never had answers. Looking out over the city skyline one evening, Reynolds reflected on what lay ahead. Another case would come, another mystery to unravel. But for now, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace, knowing that Emily Carter's voice had been heard and that the truth, no matter how painful, had finally come to light. Time passed, and the city of Atlanta slowly returned to its daily rhythm. The shock of Pastor Carter's crimes lingered, but as with all tragedies, the world kept moving. The church, now under new leadership, attempted to rebuild its congregation, though many former members struggled to reconcile their faith with the reality of the man they had once revered. The once thriving institution bore the scars of its fallen leader, and attendance never fully recovered. Detective Reynolds continued his work, but Emily Carter's case remained with him. Every so often he would visit her grave, standing silently before the headstone, reflecting on the young life lost too soon. He had fought to bring her justice, but he knew that no verdict could ever undo what had happened. Emily's story, however, served as a grim reminder that truth always found a way to surface, no matter how deeply it had been buried. Evelyn Carter moved to another state, seeking to start anew. The trial had left her emotionally drained, and the weight of her past was too much to bear in a city that knew her only as the wife of a murderer. She avoided the media, refused interviews, and lived quietly, away from the prying eyes that once judged her. She had played a role in the secrecy, but now she wanted nothing more than to leave it all behind. Rachel Mills dedicated her life to advocacy, working with organizations that supported victims of abuse and violence. She spoke at schools and community centers, sharing Emily's story as a warning to others. Though she would never fully heal from the loss of her best friend, she found purpose in ensuring that Emily's voice was never forgotten. Deacon Robert Hughes, forever haunted by his association with Carter, faded into obscurity. The whispers never stopped, and though he had never been charged with a crime, the court of public opinion had already sentenced him. He left Atlanta, his once respected name now synonymous with scandal and secrecy. For Reynolds, the case had been another reminder of the darkness people were capable of hiding behind masks of righteousness. He had seen it before, and he would see it again. But no matter how many times he uncovered the truth, it never got easier. One evening, as he sat in his office, reviewing another file on another case, he allowed himself a brief pause. He glanced at the framed photograph of Emily, one the department had kept after the case closed. He took a deep breath, then returned to his work. There were always more mysteries to solve and more injustices to fight, and as long as he was able, he would keep going, knowing that every uncovered truth brought some measure of peace to the ones left behind. Emily Carter's story had ended, but for Detective Reynolds, the pursuit of justice was never over.